Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to Session 5 of the Knowledge Transfer Conference 2020. The title of this session is The Message, the Messenger, Relations of Trust in the Agri-Extension, and we have three excellent presentations addressing these issues this morning. My name is Siobhan Kavanagh. I'm the Regional Manager for the Teagasc Advisory Service in Waterford and Kilkenny, and I'll be chairing today's session. Monica Gorman is my co-chair, and she'll be looking after the presentations and moderating the questions. And I encourage you to engage as much as possible in this session this morning. It's always more difficult over Zoom, but we have the Q&A facility on screen, and to encourage you to put in as many questions as possible. As the title suggests, the focus of this morning's meeting is about the message, the messenger, and the trust in that messenger, and the different types of messengers that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis. And to me, the messenger is probably one of the most important areas and critically important to knowledge transfer and affecting change at farm level. We have, I suppose, increased our focus on the softer skills in extension services, particularly in the development of the SECRA programme over recent years. Many of the concepts that we'll talk about today aren't that terribly new, and I suppose when I was preparing for today, I was thinking about in particular the communities of practice. And I likened that to the advisory service 25, maybe even 30 years ago, where you had 3 or 4 advisors in a single office with 1-4 between them. They had that community of practice that was so valuable in terms of CPD. They just didn't know it was community of practice. And I suppose the point I'm making there is that while we move on in terms of technology in the digital era, it forces us to move on. But engaging with farmers and colleagues, it's important that we don't forget the basics. And very often, the structures that were in place 25 and 30 years ago are as relevant now as they were back then. Tom Kelly, in his opening speech, reminded us of a comment that John Parry made last year about the importance of the advisor sitting down and having time to have a cup of tea with the farmer. And I think that's so important in establishing that the advisor is a messenger that the farmer will engage with and that will trust. And I think taking the time to do that is really important. And we will hear about the complexities of the messenger through our presentations this morning. In a world that's running at breakneck speed, we need to take the time to be careful to give the time to establishing those relationships. Anyway, I think we're in for a really interesting session with great insights into how we interact with one another in advisory services, the challenges with certain messages, and the impact of that message on how we deliver our message. We have 3 scholars this morning, 1 scholar this morning who have completed research masters, 2 have completed their taught masters, and 1 is midway through, and that's Niall Duffy, who has worked in the EBI project in the Lakelands region. So we will get started and hand over to Monica to go to the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Siobhan. Our first presenter in this session is Maeve Johnston. Maeve completed a research master's on communities of practice among agricultural advisors to enhance their continuous professional development.
My name is Maeve Johnston, and the title of my research is an examination of communities of practice to determine their potential in enhancing continuous professional development. So I carried out a case study of Teagasc. My supervisors were Jim Kinsella of UCD and Jane Kavanagh of Teagasc. So just to give you a quick bit of background to my research, so Teagasc carried out an internal in-service review back in 2017. So the purpose of the review was to ensure that the in-service training programme was effective, relevant, and that it incorporated new ways of thinking. So the review highlighted the need for more advisor input to the programme, the allocation of more time for advisor input, and the use of a range of methodologies and technologies in the delivery of the programme. So in addition to this, management also observed emerging communities of practice within Teagasc, and they felt that it was important to explore these to see if they could be used as a method to enhance continuous professional development. So my research objectives were to outline the characteristics, structures and processes of effective communities of practice, to identify the existence of communities of practice within Teagasc with a particular emphasis on knowledge transfer activities, and then finally to determine if communities of practice are effective in supporting continuous professional development for Teagasc advisors, education officers, specialists and teachers. For my study, I carried out a range of methodologies. So for phase 1, I carried out a literature review to identify the characteristics of communities of practice and criteria for classifying these communities of practice. In phase 2, I carried out a national audit of Teagasc's knowledge transfer activities to identify the existence of communities of practice, But in order to identify the existence of communities of practice, I also had to identify formal working groups and project teams within Teagasc, because although there are differences, there are similarities between the two. So for phase 3, then I carried out one-to-one semi-structured interviews with key informants of the identified communities of practice from phase 2. Phase 4, I carried out interactions with the members of these communities of practice. And then finally, in phase 5, I carried out a case study on an outside organisation where there are existing communities of practice in operation. So in this case, it was the Irish Primary Principals Network. Literature to highlight what a community of practice is. It is a community that is defined as has voluntary membership and regular interactions. It has arisen organically and is about knowledge sharing and management. The members' roles or responsibilities are not assigned or defined, and then finally it is based on what is important to the members. Key findings from my results were that there was 65 individuals from the 105 responses that I got that did not identify as being part of either a formal working group, a project team, or a community of practice within Teagasc. So that left 38 entities identified. So there were 20 project teams, 8 working groups, and 10 communities of practice. So for this study, I focused on the 10 communities of practice that were identified. In the dairy category, 3 in the dry stock category, 2 in the education, and 2 in the technology and adoption group meetings. So further to this, then, it was identified that there was only 6 that were in operation at the time of the research. Some emerging themes from my interaction with the members of the community of practice was that they identified clear and strong benefits of the communities of practice. So these were, they got to share experiences and their resources. The communities of practice were quick and practical. They allowed them to have access to the right people. They found that having a set date and time for the meetings worked well so that they could keep their schedule free, but the topics of the meeting, that's when they, rather having no set agenda. Then some issues and challenges that they identified was that sometimes client work got in the way, but this could have been avoided if they had a set date and time for the meetings. And then some of the groups had a preference over the method of interaction. So some groups interacted over link and some of them met face to face. So there's no set one which is better, but it's important for the group themselves to define or decide what's better for their respective group. The conclusions from my study was that there was 6 communities of practice across different departments identified in Teagasc. There was, in general, a lack of awareness surrounding communities of practice because this idea is pretty novel within agriculture, but the staff that did identify as being part of community of practice found value and identified the clear and strong benefits, but they also did acknowledge some of the difficulties as highlighted in the group's practice. And then finally, that the communities of practice could act as a platform, or did act as a platform, to allow members to share experiences and resources. Some recommendations from my study was that Teagasc explore the use of new and emerging collaboration tools and technologies to foster and further enhance the development of the communities of practice that exist within Teagasc. We also suggested that there is a possible place for the coordinator role with communities of practice in Teagasc, so this role could support these communities of practice to become operational and also further enhance the ones that already exist. And then that finally, the communities of practice should strongly be considered to be embedded in the CPD programme in Teagasc. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Maeve. Next, we have Daniel McPartlin. Daniel looked at the role and effectiveness of locally led knowledge transfer initiatives, and he examined the Grass on the Bypass project in County Offaly.
Hello, my name is Daniel McPartlin, and my study title is A Study of the Role and Effectiveness of Local Led KT Initiatives Examining the Grass on the Bypass project. My supervisors in Teagasc was Mark Coyne and Paul Fox, and my UCD supervisor was Dr. Tomas Russell, and I was based in the Teagasc office in Tullamore, County Offaly. Okay, so what is an advisor-led local KT initiative? They're a participatory approach to extension which involves a bottom-up holistic approach representing a move away from the technology transfer model of the past towards a facilitative approach that considers the needs and wants of the local community first and foremost. These initiatives, which are led by advisors, involve strong collaboration with local farmers. The Grass and the Bypass project that my study examined is an advisor-led local KT initiative which involves collaboration between a host farmer and local Teagasc advisors. Okay, so what is the Grass and the Bypass project? So, set up in 2017 with the aim of demonstrating best grass management practices to farmers in the Midland region. The site was chosen because of its location, as you can see here, along the busy N52 Tullamore bypass, with over 10,000 cars passing each day. So this was a set stock field with no grazing divisions, and now it's separated into 9 1-hectare permanent divisions. The whole concept involved in this project was about planting a seed in the farmer's mind so that when the past see cattle out in early February, early fertiliser, 60 cattle at 23 acres, so that they'd be inclined to do something similar on their own farm. Basically, the project set a standard and acted as a shop window to other farmers in the Midland region. Okay, so we had 4 objectives. Number 1 was to identify the purpose of local ed initiative. I addressed this using a literature review and 6 key informer interviews. The second objective was to examine the development of local ed KT initiatives. So I adopted a case study approach to the Grass and the Bypass to see how this project was developed from start to finish and to what it is today. Third, to examine the impacts Grass and the Bypass has on local farmers and advisors. So I used questionnaires, focus groups and some secondary data analysis here. And lastly, to provide recommendations to Teagasc for the development of future local ed initiatives. So I suppose the key findings. Overall, the main findings from the study showed that a local-led advisor KT initiative are an effective method of improving knowledge transfer among farmers and advisors about new or improved farm practices. In fact, my study found that local-led initiatives are the preferred method of learning of many farmers, as the local element of these initiatives make it easier for farmers to identify with it, as circumstances such as land type and farm size are often similar to their own environment. So I suppose the findings, or the purpose of a local-led initiative, is to promote farmer learning, maximise profit for the farmer and making the most of what they have already, and to use as a showcase for other farmers. So the key ingredients for the development of a local ed initiative. So the study found that there are some key aspects that are needed to ensure success of the project. One of the main considerations is the relationship between farmer and advisor. I found that the element of trust in both the advisory organisation and the individual advisor delivering the information is crucial for successful initiatives, and this strongly emerged during my research. Other factors that emerge relating to the development of local ed initiatives are the visibility and accessibility of the local ed initiative. The selection of the host farmer is also very important, and the expertise and commitment of an advisor is also very important. So the implications of these findings. So my study highlighted that the number of factors that will benefit Teagasc and agricultural advisors in both private and public extension. It identifies the purpose of local ed advisor KT initiatives from the point of view of farmers and advisors. It sets out essential elements for the development of these initiatives and demonstrates the positive impacts they have. It will be of interest to advisors who set out to establish a good advisor-client relationship with new clients, but will also be useful to reaffirm the importance of maintaining advisor-client relationships for existing clients. The study provides recommendations for Teagasc in relation to the development of future local ed initiatives. So the recommendation for Teagasc for local ed initiatives. So I suppose the main one is for Teagasc is to continue and if possible to increase the number of local ed initiatives as a means of increasing learning opportunities for farmers, and it's an effective method of knowledge transfer. Time for the advisors is also very important. It has to be considered that involvement in a local ed initiative may go beyond the normal 9 to 5 working hours. A teamwork is very important, so a number of advisors working together, bouncing ideas off each other is also very important. Then the host farmer I mentioned already is very important, trust as well, and accessibility. So finally, I'd just like to acknowledge the opportunity presented to me by the Teagasc and UCD to carry out the research, and I'm very grateful to the Teagasc Walsh Scholarship Programme for funding this research. I'd also sincerely like to thank my mentors, Dr. Tomas Russell from UCD, who's a fantastic support and encouragement, and also to Mark Coyne and Paul Fox from Teagasc.
Thank you, Daniel. Blair Ruffing is next. Blair completed a research master's looking at advisory tools and processes that could support potato farmers and agronomists in assessing exposure to the risk of cadmium.
Hello, my name is Blair Ruffing, and I'm going to be presenting my research on advisory and KT tools and processes to support potato farmers and agronomists to assess their exposure to risk of cadmium. Cadmium in Ireland is geogenic in nature. It can be found in the bedrock. It's associated with impure limestone bedrock types. The hotspots of cadmium concentrations in Ireland can be found in Dublin, Meath, and Kildare, and that is the impacted region for this study. EU legislation has mandated maximum level requirements for cadmium of 0.1 milligrams of cadmium per kilograms of fresh weight potatoes. As that stands, 70% of growers in the impacted area are predicted to be compliant with this maximum level, while 30% are predicted to be non-compliant. There's discussions to possibly lower this maximum level requirement down to 0.075. If that does go ahead, then you're looking at more of a 50-50 split between compliant and non-compliant. A decision support tool was developed for this project, the cadmium risk assessment model. So we asked the grower to test their soil for cadmium. Those soil test results are sent to Oak Park to be run through a model to generate a risk assessment output in the form of a traffic light rating system, and associated advice is given with each level of risk. So the objectives of this study are: 1, to assess the influences affecting potato growers and agronomists' risk assessment of available soil cadmium and their adoption of the cadmium risk assessment model; 2, evaluate the effectiveness and uptake of the cadmium risk assessment model proposed for farmers and agronomists; and 3rd, analyze extension tools and processes for both building engagement in the potato growing community and making an impact on the farmer decision-making process. The methodology used was knowledge and attitudinal surveys of growers in the affected area, of which there were 39, surveys of agronomists in the affected area, of which there were 7, and then brief case studies of growers in the affected area, of which we did 3. Some important findings on the grower side of things. Familiarity with the cadmium issue was extremely low across all ages and all farm sizes, whereas likelihood of using the mitigation strategies if cadmium levels were found to be high and exceeding that maximum level was high across all farm sizes and all age groups. The level of concern was actually the same for farmers in the young farmer category, 21 to 40 years of age, whether on owned or rented land, while all other age groups, so anyone above 40, had less concern for their rented land when it came to cadmium contamination. And finally, the mean score for growers' likelihood of using the cadmium risk assessment model was high. However, in actuality, only 5 out of 39 actually engaged with the model. Findings on the agronomist side of things. On average, they had a very high level of awareness and concern of the issue. However, their knowledge of mitigation strategies and rate of advising clients about the cadmium issue was low. A lot of them said that they would have heard about the issue years past, but the issue would have gone quiet, and therefore so did they when it came to advising their clients on this issue. I'm going to highlight one of the case studies completed for this study. As you can see, this grower received results that gave a soil risk index of high and very high. They were asked to fill out an opinion-based survey after receiving results. This grower specifically stated that they only got their cadmium analysis out of general curiosity. Other variables on the list included help to make land renting decisions, advisors push to do so, produce quality, etc., but they only choose general curiosity. Secondly, they stated that results are probably needed, but only if it becomes law, and they're not so likely to get the test done again, only if they have to, would they? And they're not so likely to recommend to another grower, since it's only giving bad news in their area. They stated that results were very easy, extremely easy to understand, that they were very well explained to them. And finally, the grower stated that timeliness was the most disliked thing about the delivery of results. Unfortunately, it took months, not just for this grower, but for the other growers that engaged with the model. It took months to receive results from the time that they sent off their soil to by the time they got the results. And it's just time wasted that they just didn't have. So essentially, the results were wasted, seeing as though they had to move on with making decisions without being informed from the results. Finally, final recommendations. Just clear legislation that picks a side of either using the carrot or stick approach. Both can work in this case, negative economic incentives or positive economic incentives, but there needs to be a clear idea of which one legislation is going to go with. Ongoing knowledge transfer and exchange efforts need to be made with both growers and agronomists, not only in the potato sector, but across the whole horticultural industry in Ireland. And then finally, more research into the question of how to communicate unpalatable messages in the agricultural sector. Thank you very much for listening, and any questions are welcome.
Thank you, Blair. Next, we have Pamela McCormack, Pamela completed a taught master's and her thesis was on the sales approaches that would influence customers' decision making in buying an agricultural product or service.
Hi, my name is Pamela McCormick and I'm here this afternoon to present to you my thesis titled An Examination of the Sales Approaches Influencing Customers' Decision Making in Buying an Agricultural Product or Service in the case of Kehoe Farming, County Wexford. The aim of this research project was to identify sales approaches that best influence farmers' decision-making in relation to commodities and services purchased from agri-suppliers in Ireland. It specifically looked at identifying the common sales approaches used by agri-suppliers, establishing the sales approach preferences of clients of agri-suppliers, and determining the effectiveness of sales approaches identified in terms of how they influence customer decision-making. The study set out to examine the different marketing strategies used by agribusiness to develop and maintain their customer relationship. From studying different pieces of literature, the main techniques identified were sales representatives, customer testimonials, social media, monthly newsletters, newspaper articles, trade shows, and websites. To complete the research for the project, an online questionnaire was designed on Google Forms. This was emailed to all customers who had an email address on the company's database. There was a 39% response rate. As you can see, there was a mix of farming enterprises included, as it was sent to customers of both our feed and bedding business, as well as the contracting customers. Some findings from the study. By completing the research, price was found to be the greatest influence on farmers' decision-making. Participants had mixed opinions on sales representatives, as they were rated the second highest source of information. The benefits of having a sales rep calling to your farm was noted as having a good knowledge of the farm and having only one point of contact within the company, while 94% of respondents noted a negative of sales rep visiting your farm. 73% of participants said they followed an agribusiness on social media for the benefit of having regular informal updates from the company. Facebook was the most popular social media platform. 80% of participants were influenced by feedback from other farmers. It was noted how important this feedback was to other farmers before purchasing a product or a service from an agri-supplier. Respondents were interested in product trial results to gain knowledge of the product, while tillage farmers had the most uptake of reading trial results. Some recommendations for Kehoe Farming and other similar agri-suppliers. Social media presence should be increased by agri-suppliers, but their target market should be kept in mind. Social media was preferred by younger farmers, while older farmers preferenced newspapers. Products and services should be trialled and results shared with customers due to the large interest found in reading trial results. This could be done informally using social media or the company's website, or more formally by publishing these research results. Customer services and products quality should be emphasised to staff, as the business cannot control the opinions customers have, but must leave them with a lasting impression. Companies should consider exhibiting at trade or agricultural shows in different areas, as participants said they were willing to try a new business or a new brand that they were unfamiliar with. Thank you for listening to my presentation here today. All questions are welcome.
Thank you, Pamela. Niall Duffy is next, and Niall is midway through his research masters looking at the factors that influence dairy farmers' attitudes to the EBI in the Lakeland region.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Niall Duffy, and my study title is What are the breeding objectives of high output, low EBI herds in the Lakeland region, and is there a need for tailored advisory messages? My supervisors are Dr. Monica Gorman, James Dunn, and Dr. Joe Patton, and I am located in Ballyhaise Advisory Office. So to kick us off, this is a project about farmer breeding objectives and tailored advice. The study is based around the Irish Economic Breeding Index, which is an index tool used to select animals for breeding. The EBI is widely adopted nationwide, and normally, on average, each herd sees an increase of €9 per year. The first phase of the study is to understand the breeding objectives of high output, technically excellent non-EBI adopting farmers. The rationale is to focus on this group of non-EBI adopting farmers who, rather than being described as hard to reach, can perhaps be better described as hard to convince. The national average herd EBI at the moment is €105, and the average EBI of the study group is €76, so there's a big difference there. So to identify the study population, I used high levels of milk output and high standards of milk quality as indicators of high output and technical excellence. By focusing on this specific group of farmers, there is a possibility that there are some technical concerns and reasons which explains why they are not using the EBI. It is possible that farmers are open to new ideas, new technologies, new messages, and just perhaps not as open to some of the general breeding messages. This can be seen through their low EBI score, which I mentioned earlier. Phase 2 then of the research is to develop tailored advice guidelines, which will be based on the concept of identifying the farmer breeding objectives, addressing their key concerns, and using this to develop some tailored EBI messages. So what am I trying to achieve in the study? So the first thing is to identify the breeding objectives of the farmers and their opinions towards the EBI. And the second objective then is to examine the opinions of breeding advisors in the Lakeland area and their experience in breeding for high output herds, with the idea in mind for the third objective to develop some guidelines for a tailored advice approach to breeding and possible ways to message breeding advice to farmers in a similar situation. The qualitative interviews allowed me to get a good understanding of the breeding decisions that are made on farm and the reasons why they're made. And on the right here we can see the participant selection criteria, which was used to identify a group of high output, low EBI adopting farmers. So there is quite a consistent response in terms of reoccurring themes so far. It seems like the themes are integrated and linked towards the high target output per cow. Secondly, farmers feel that the EBI is targeted and messaged towards spring calving grass-based farms. There are also some technical themes identified relating to how farmers have many different criteria to select bulls, and also relating to the conformation of their animals, which is important from a cultural aspect and also from a heifer sales aspect. Finally, there's also another technical theme relating to the optimal cow for their system. So I identified the top 4 criteria that farmers are breeding for through the use of their bulls or bulls team. And here on the table, we can see that no farmer has the same criteria in the same order as another. So it seems like farmers are breeding for what they want to improve on the farm in the future, and it possibly highlights the need for farm-specific advice and that no one bull fits all farms. So what is the impact on knowledge extension, and is this study translatable to other areas of agriculture? And I would say yes, it is translatable, and here are 4 early observations that perhaps could be used when given tailored advice in the future. So the first one is around the messaging. Improve the messaging around EBI by addressing the things that are preventing farmers from using it. Secondly, include and incorporate breeding objectives and alternative criteria that is important to the farmer. Thirdly, acknowledge that the farmers are a different group and know the EBI quite well and may have some genuine concerns around it. And 4, don't assume farmers will or will not use or adopt the EBI technology, as 13 out of the 15 farmers actually want to improve their EBI, but are just very, very selective in the high EBI bulls that they want to use. So here's a bit more detail on the farm system influence. So farmers are in a high output system, and this influences the breeding decisions for 12 out of the 15 farmers. So farmers said they would like to see more emphasis on breeding an optimal cow for that system, and farmers have some genuine concerns around this. And an example would be that using EBI alone will lead to lack of milk, small narrow cattle with poor functional type. So also then this included in the system is the heifer sales, which is important in the area that they're in, that heifers look good and meet market demands. So if farmers are not using EBI fully to select bulls, what else are they using? And as I mentioned earlier on, they're using a combination approach of they're putting their technical skills to use. And on the right here, we can see some of the certain skills that they're using to select bulls, and all these things add into their final the final decision on whether to use a bull or not. But I suppose the one point from here that I would say is farmers are using the sub-indexes and everything within the EBI, and they're using that to help make the final decision. Farmers have many different sources of information, and on the right here we can see breeding representatives are the most common source, followed by the catalogue, self-guided, which feeds into the catalogue themselves. So farmers do a good bit of work in keeping themselves connected in the industry, in the breeding industry there. So that ties in with the second objective of the study, to focus on the breeding representatives in the area and find out, is there a consistent view among all the breeding representatives. So finally, the next steps going forward for the research is to continue with the expert interviews and continue with some more farmer interviews until I reach a point of information saturation. Then from this, develop some guidelines for a tailored advice breeding support tool, which will include all of the above that we talked about as best we can to address and include the farmers in this group. So finally, a big thank you to everyone for watching this presentation. I would also like to thank my supervisors and participants who have taken part in the study so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Niall. Next we have James Murphy. James has completed a taught master's programme, and his thesis looked at farmers' perceptions of the Eurostar RAM index in the period after the STAP programme was completed.
Hi, my name is James Murphy. As part of my master's, I carried out a thesis on farmers' perception of the Eurostar RAM index after the completion of the STAP scheme in the Mayo region. This is carried out with the help of my supervisor, Anne Markey. I am going to describe the background and rationale of the study, the methods carried out in the study, the findings from the research, and recommendations based on the research. Ireland's sheep sector is an important enterprise in Ireland's agricultural industry. However, sheep farmers' incomes are low, with just over €13,000 of an income in 2018. Foodright 2025 is a report published by the Department of Agriculture, suggests there are grounds to increase output by means of improved technical efficiency. This includes better tools for the breeding of animals. One way Ireland's sheep industry can improve its profitability is through the use of genetically evaluated Eurostar rams. The Eurostar RAM index is a tool which is designed to support farmers when purchasing breeding stock. An index ranks an animal from 1 to 5, with 5 being the best. This has been designed by Sheep Ireland. The Sheep Technology Adoption Programme, or STAP, was launched in 2013 and was designed to encourage the adoption of the best management practice on sheep farms. In order to meet the requirements of the Sheep Technology Adoption Programme, farmers had to purchase a Eurostar ram without an index from 3 to 5. Since the completion of the STAP scheme in 2015, there has been no incentive to purchase a Eurostar ram. With this in mind, this study looks at 4 research questions. Are farmers continuing to use the Eurostar RAM index after the completion of the STAP scheme? What are farmers' main reasons for continuing to use Eurostar rams? And if they have discontinued to use Eurostar rams, what are the reasons for doing so? Are there any changes that could be made to the Eurostar RAM index in order to maximise practice change? A mixed method approach was used in this study. Qualitative analysis consisted of semi-structured interviews with Sheep Ireland board members. Interviews were carried out with 3 of its members. These interviews were carried out over the phone due to COVID restrictions. Quantitative analysis consisted of phone surveys with sheep farmers who were in STAP groups. Mayo was chosen as a study area as it is an area with a strong sheep population. Also, having contacts in the Mayo region as working there from a Walsh Scholar helped with data collection. In the 3 sheep groups, there were 47 members, 40 of which completed the survey, giving a response rate of over 85%. Phone surveys were carried out due to the limitation of not being able to meet up because of COVID-19. From the results, just over half, or 52.5% of the respondents, have continued to use Eurostar RAMs after the completion of the STAP scheme. This can be seen here in the pie chart. Also, there's been an increase in the number of searches on ramsearch.ie, which has the total available RAMs that are in the country. In 2015, there was 18,659 searches, which is increased up to 53,409 in 2019. Farmers who continue to use the Eurostar RAMs were more likely to find it easy to use and reliable than those who discontinued using Eurostar RAMs. This is in line with the technology acceptance model. Education and farm size also played a role in continuation of Eurostar RAMs. Farmers who didn't continue using Eurostar RAMs preferred to choose a RAM on their own judgment. Also, farmers who did continue to use Eurostar RAMs had different motivational factors to join the STAP scheme compared to farmers who didn't continue to use Eurostar RAMs. It can be seen in the two charts. The farmers who did continue to use Eurostar RAMs said to gain more technical knowledge was the most motivational factor to join the STAP scheme, compared to farmers who didn't continue to use Eurostar RAMs, but they said that €1,000 payment was their most motivational factor. From the interviews, board members had different ideas on changes they would make to the Eurostar RAM index. One interview commented on the amalgamation of the two index into one index. Another commented on the addition of an environmental index. From these findings, there are a number of recommendations. This includes Sheep Ireland could highlight the latest developments of the Eurostar index to farmers who did not continue to use Eurostar RAMs. This could be highlighted in areas where these farmers gain most of their information about farming, such as newspapers and social media. If a similar scheme was to run again, slight changes could be made to the structure of the scheme in order to maximise technology adoption. Instead of being paid to attend mandatory discussion groups, a subsidised client fee could be recommended, such as a free farm visit, as this encourages more client-advisor contact and increased chance of technology continuation, and to advertise voluntary discussion groups. Thanks for listening. Any questions?
Thanks, James. Now I'm going to hand you back to Siobhan, who will lead the panel discussion.
Okay, thank you very much to all our presenters. I think you'll agree there's a huge amount of work has gone into the research that they have done, and there was a lot of effort put into those presentations. I think they have given great insight into the particular topics that they were dealing with. So I'll ask each panel to turn back on their microphone and their camera, and we'll get going with a few questions. It came up and the panelists, and I suppose based on the research, the main recommendation that you would give for extension services in Ireland, and I suppose also for any to be interested to hear what the recommendation would be. As yours slightly different, so I'll start with you.
Thanks, Siobhan. Yeah. So one of the objectives of my study was to look, was to explore if communities of practice could be effective in supporting continuous professional development in Teagasc. So I found that there were 6 communities of practice active in Teagasc at the time of my research. They actually did run alongside the continuous professional development program. So for example, one of the groups runs at the last Friday of every month to coincide with the dairy in-service training, which runs on the last Thursday of every month. So on the Friday, then the advisors in such a region meet up and they describe it themselves to bring the training a bit further. So they discuss what topics they had dealt with in the training the day before. So the research suggests that continuous professional development needs to be self-directed, goal-orientated and flexible. So it needs to consist of small groups, it needs to be personable, and this is what communities of practice are. So essentially, the research suggests that these communities of practice can enhance and embellish the continuous professional development program in Teagasc. And because they already exist in Teagasc, they have the potential to be a recognised element of the CPD program. So at the minute they are acting alongside the in-service training and the advisory professional development program that Teagasc are currently running.
Okay,
Thank you, Maeve, for that. Maeve, for that. How do you communication from your studies?
Sorry about that. You were breaking up there, but I think you were talking to me. So recommendations primarily would be to break up the kind of middleman that was a part of my study. So as I stated in my presentation, what we were asking growers to do is send off their soil samples, and we had a lab that was working with us in order to do that. But unfortunately, that caused for serious time delays and growers getting their results back. So one of my primary recommendations was, if possible, if Teagasc has the means and the equipment in order to do so, is to do in-house soil testing for cadmium. Teagasc already has that rapport with their clients, and they trust Teagasc. And so I think it would really increase engagement if growers had the choice between Teagasc or a third-party lab. They would obviously prefer to go with Teagasc in order to do their business. So that would be my number one recommendation, to not only expedite the results, but really increase engagement across the board with growers.
And I think we're having a little trouble with Siobhan's sound at the moment. So we'll come to Pamela next. What's your one recommendation? Pamela, I'll ask you to unmute your microphone.
Yeah, sorry, now I can hear you. So from the different extension services for an agri supplier, which is supplying the farmer, that I would have looked at, I think definitely the take-home message would be that quality, both in terms of customer services of good quality and then of your product or services themselves having good standard. Because feedback from other farmers was by far rated as the biggest influence before a farmer goes to buy something. And it's in your own interest then as the company to leave a lasting impression with that in terms of the product as well as the service. So whether you're providing a sales rep on social media or whatever, definitely for your product and your service, to have a high standard would be most important.
Quality of service, absolutely. I suppose that's very fundamental to trust. Niall, can I ask you to come up with your one recommendation?
Yeah, so my one recommendation for extension officers would be to acknowledge that farmers could have some technical and cultural concerns, and that then the guidelines that will be hopefully developed from the study will be individual guidelines and will be based on the farmer that's in front of you, because the research shows that the farmers have different, breeding objectives in terms of the ideal cow and the ideal bull. So the guideline, it's not really going to categorize farmers into any category. It's going to be individual based towards the farmer to help them and address their own objectives at an individual level. So it's important to remember that and not to categorize them. That'd be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Niall.
Thank you.
We're good, Siobhan. I think you're back.
Yeah, so for my recommendation, according to to the technology acceptance model, the perceived usefulness and the perceived use plays a major role in a person's perception of a technology and, let's say, the adoption and continuation of a technology. From my research, that the farmers who did continue using Eurostar rams did find it useful and easy to use, and the farmers who didn't, they perceived that it wasn't useful or easy to use. So it's been 4 or 5 years since the completion of the STAP, and there has been advancements in the Eurostar index, such as crossbreed evaluations, genomic evaluations, and also improvements in the RAM search. But these need to be highlighted to the farmers who haven't continued it in order to improve their perceived perception of the technology and how easy it is to use it and how useful it is for them. Also, this should be highlighted, let's say, in areas where most of these farmers gain most of their information on farming. These farmers got their information from newspapers and social media rather than just from the advisory service. The farmers who did continue using the Eurostar rams, they got most of their information from advisory service. So it does show that extension was working for them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for that, James. And there seems to be a lot of questions coming in, so we might just go to the Q&A section straight away. Maybe one of the first questions that's coming in is, would farmers benefit from being involved in communities of practice? And I suppose in some ways you could say discussion groups are a community of practice, but would the farmers benefit from being in something similar?
Yeah, so I suppose the communities of practice that I looked at, because it was a case study of Teagasc, it was the Knowledge Transfer Directorate. So it did involve the advisors, education officers, specialists and teachers. So for a community of practice, it involves peers. So at that level, it was just the advisors were involved with the advisors, or the specialists were involved with the advisors. My study didn't exactly look at the farmers' communities of practice, but as you said, the KT discussion groups that were active would have been described or could be classified as a community of practice.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. And just one other question in relation to the motivation factors for setting up communities of practice amongst the advisors. What were the main motivating factors for doing that?
So I suppose the advisors, a lot of the groups that were set up were self-directed. So they identified a need for the group within the region. So a lot of cases it was that there could be just one dry stock advisor in the office, and they might not speak to another dry stock advisor from one end of the week to the next. So it was the advisors came together in the region, and the dry stock advisors would meet up just to make sure that, as they said themselves, they were all on the same page, that they were all going out with the same message, and that they could stay up to date as well, because they found that the in-service training, sometimes they needed more time for peer discussion and for question and answers, so that they could break down the message from in-service training down to a message that they can go out to farmers with.
Okay, and just maybe to link your presentation or your study to Daniel's and the locally led advisor program, was that program included in your COP? Because I would consider that a community of practice where the advisors were gaining as much as the farmers locally. Was it included?
No, it actually wasn't. So to identify the communities of practice in Teagasc, I did send out an audit for advisors to self-identify the communities of practice they're involved with, but that didn't show up as a community of practice.
Okay, all right. Even though I know from the advisors in the area, it was a very valuable service training, local in service training. There's a question in here for Pamela. The sales reps, given that we're in the middle of COVID, is the purchasing of agri products through online store a viable option for customers? And that's for Pamela.
Yeah, well, from looking at different things, and there was an incentive with people's local enterprise offices as well, that a lot of agri companies have now went online from selling. They now have an e-commerce website to sell their products on, as well as a lot more webinars, social media interaction, kind of things like that. So definitely online has a lot more potential, and there's an awful lot more farmers kind of dealing with even banking online for payments and stuff that would have been, that farmers may not have used before, especially younger farmers. Definitely.
Okay. Just to go back maybe to some of your results, you mentioned that 94% of farmers were negative, I think, about sales reps coming into the yard. That was my understanding of it.
They may.
Can you just
so I done an online survey, and the farmers then interacted it. So it was kind of listed. I gave a list of negatives, and it was list one. So 94% did kind of tick a box to say that they found them not useful as such, or there was a negative to them. So oftentimes they found I wasn't actually a regular customer of the company was the most kind of common. Okay. I'm not a regular customer of that company, and they're just kind of calling into me. So that's why they found it a negative approach. But then there was a lot of positives reported as well. Okay,
and how do sales reps on the ground add value to the sales that they do at farm level? So a sales rep goes into a yard today and he's selling feed. How does he add value to that service that he's given at farm level, do you think?
Well, a lot of people, you've kind of developed a relationship with the farmer, so there is a level of trust in the farmer does now kind of have a level of trust for what that advisor is saying, but then they're also aware of that farm, what's going on in that farm, what type of a system he has, when those animals are going to be finished, maybe when those crops are aimed to be cut. And it's kind of a regular relationship between the company and the farmer, where a lot of farmers also said that they didn't like ringing up a company maybe and you're dealing with a different person every day, whereas if you have the one point of contact within the company, that's what a lot of farmers noted, they kind of preferred that, or that was their preference.
Okay, so they could build up a relationship and build up trust with that person over a period of time. Okay.
Yeah.
You highlighted the importance of the testimonials from other farmers. How does a sales rep capitalize on that knowledge? How do they make best use of the testimonials from other farmers?
I suppose it's direct feedback back to the company, as in maybe what works or what doesn't work. So with online, you know, you can now leave reviews and stuff on social media and stuff, but other farmers, definitely it's part of, as kind of farming is a community thing, farmers do talk, and if one person says a negative comment about a company, it would, so it's in the sales rep interest maybe while they're in the yard to hopefully not allow a farmer to have a negative opinion of them leaving maybe.
Okay, all right, thank you, Dana, for that. There's a question here for Blair from the audience. Are there lessons from your study for all advisors on how to use decision supports for risk analysis and problem solving with farmers? So lessons learned from your study on how to use these tools.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat that. You broke up a bit there, so if you could repeat the beginning of the question.
Sorry, yeah, are there lessons from your study for all farmers on how to use decision support tools for risk and assessment and problem solving?
Yeah, so I guess to answer that, I would have to go to the more case study side of my study. So the farmers that actually engaged with the decision support tool, unfortunately, we had a pretty low number, 5 out of the 39 growers. But when they finished interacting with the decision support tool, they were asked to kind of fill out an opinion-based survey online on how they felt that their interaction went and what they would want to do differently. And a lot of them enjoyed the kind of traffic light rating system. The simpler, the better, they said. And so they were able to see, oh, I'm in the green. I have a green light means go. I'm doing the right thing. Or they're in the red. That means that, look, I have work to do and I should be more conscious of this risk, and maybe put this one more to the front than as opposed to some other risks, because this one is more pressing. So I guess those would be the top ones, is just they liked the simplicity of it, and also the kind of one-on-one advice, along with kind of data-driven data support or decision support tools. So the cadmium analysis tool was really heavily founded in scientific research and data. Lots of trials were done in order to make the final decision support tool. And so when you're able to explain the background of how it was created and why you're able to trust it, that just goes to show that they can trust it as well. And when you're able to give them a simple answer in the end, although the answer is simple, the actual background that went into that answer is not so simple. So you're able to trust it in that way. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for that. I'm just going to move on to Niall, and a question for Niall. Niall, when you were talking about the sources of information, the top one was the breeding representatives. Can you tell us a little bit more about how influential the breeding representatives are when it comes to adoption of the EBI technology in that area?
Yeah, so that relates to part 2 of the study, where I'm actually currently conducting interviews with breeding representatives to find out their views. So yes, around half of the farmers are using breeding representatives as their main source of breeding information. So the way it works is breeding representatives are selecting a group of bulls that feel would suit the farmer and their system. And from that, then the farmers would be, picking bulls which they feel from that group would be best suited to them. So really that's really they have a big influence on the breeding strategy of the farm, and the farmers are dependent on their advice. So the two are linked. So the two are really linked with each other. So I'm only started the second stage of the study, so I can't really comment on what the views of the breeding advisors are of the EBI. Okay. But it would be a a combination approach where the breeding advisors are using other criteria as well to advise the farmer, on breeding.
And where do the local discussion groups and one-to-one and visits and that, where does that fit in as a source of information from your studies?
So local discussion groups would not really be, it wasn't an identified source of breeding information for the farmers. So I suppose it has to be highlighted that farmers have they know a lot about breeding themselves, and they use a combination of different sources. So breeding advisors was highlighted as the main source. They're also in, they're in the IHFA. 7 out of the 15 are in the IHFA, and they would have friends, also interested in breeding. So they'd combine a lot of their knowledge and, make a decision based on a combination of information sources, I suppose. And it's not all dependent on one information source. They have the skills to make their own decision really at the end of the day. It's about gathering as much information as possible to make an informed decision.
Okay, and I suppose, Niall, on that, just on how would Teagasc leverage the influence that the breeding reps have on farmers in terms of delivering the message on EBI to those farmers? So how do we leverage that influence that they have?
So I suppose it's about delivering what the farmer really wants. That would be the way that you could leverage that. If the farmer, it's about delivering an animal that the farmer is going to be happy with, in the future. So it's about, and also about doing that in a way that's economically profitable for the farmer, because at the end of the day, that is what this group of farmers, I can say, is really aiming for. So it's about really understanding their individual breeding objectives for the farm, everything that's included in that breeding objective, and it's about including their wants as well, using that and trying to apply that, bring that into account, and deliver some advice or deliver a team of bulls that are going to deliver on that and all their objectives in an economical, profitable way. So it's about taking them into account, take everything into account that the farmer wants, and deliver upon that.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that, Niall. We've one final question for James, because we're just running out of time. James, is the lack of breeding variety with Eurostar ratings an issue with farmers looking to purchase? Many new or less common breeds in Ireland don't have a selection of Eurostar rams as the likes of Texels, Belclare, Suffolk, etc. have.
Yeah, so in terms of, I was with phone surveys with the farmers that I did do with, that was it was a very, out of the 40 surveys, only one commented on that there was the breed in particular that he was looking for wasn't star rated, or there wasn't many rams available for the star rating. But other than that, then there was what didn't play as much major role in terms of the non-adoption or the continuation of the star rams. Another reason why some of the farmers didn't continue using the star index as well was the farmers who didn't continue, a large proportion of them believed that they would choose to buy on their own judgment alone, as in they might believe that there could be that they're like, if they start using these tools, that they might degrade themselves as a stockman, or as the skill of being a good stockman, the skill might be lost.
Okay, all right, thanks for that. And just one final question, I suppose, to you as well, James. What do you think of incentivising farmers to be in discussion groups? What's your own thinking on it, having done this study?
Well, in terms of incentivize, I know there's profitable farmers who are in discussion groups do have more profitable incomes. However, that is reduced with the discussion groups that are being incentivized. I would, in terms of being incentivized, I would go more down the lines of possibly a reduction of a client fee of maybe a farm visit. It encourages more of a client farmer contact rather than a discussion group possibly that a farmer mightn't like to go to. The most preferred method of communication that a farmer, from my research, their most preferred method of communication with their advisor was either one-to-one or over the phone. 87% chose one-to-one rather than, so that would be two as well.
Okay. They prefer the one-to-one, so you see value in visits to complement the discussion group. Okay. James, thank you very much for that. I'm afraid we're going to have to finish at that. It's just gone past 11:30. I just want to thank the speakers and congratulate them on the excellent presentations they've given, their passion for their subject matter and their contribution to the discussion at the end. And apologies for the quality of my sound. I'm in the office and I thought I was safe coming in here to do it, but obviously I did run into issues, so apologies for that. I want to thank you, the audience, for coming on this session and for participating in through questions. There was a lot of questions came in. We didn't get a chance to get them all answered, but hopefully Monica moderating the questions and the others will get those answered privately for you. Just to remind you that the abstracts and posters are available on the Teagasc website under Publications 2020. And finally, just before I finish up, I suppose as a regional manager working in the Extension Service, I'd really like to acknowledge the huge contribution that the Walsh Scholars have made in the regions. And I think it's fair to say that I can talk safely for all the managers across the country that they have added hugely to the vibrancy in our offices, and they forced us to think about how we go about doing our extension work, and they're a huge asset. So I think it's a great programme and a fantastic asset for us at a regional level. I wish you the best for the afternoon. I think there's one session at 2 o'clock. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and goodbye and thank you.